Hi BookTube, I'm here today with a discussion on That Deadman Dance by Kim Scott. I chose to do a discussion video as opposed to a review, just because there's so much that I want to talk about in this book. I think it is a great book for initiating a lot of conversations, and I'd like to have those discussions with you, whether you've read the book or not. There's not a lot of spoilers because the book jumps around in time and you kind of know the ending before you get there anyways. So even if you haven't read this book, I think you can still follow along with the discussion. So basic summary is the Noongar people of Western Australia are Aboriginals, and they come into contact with the European and American settlers. That's it. Basic summary. There is a large cast of characters, and they all kind of get their own story, their own kind of aspect, you know, their background and what happens to them. They're not really kind of grouped together. But they all do circle the primary character of Bobby Wobblingini, whose character is kind of captured in his name. He's Bobby Wobblingini. He has both the European name of Bobby and the Noongar name of Wobblingini, and I really hope I'm saying that correctly. So he is a young Aboriginal, but he kind of acts as an intermediary between his people and the European and American settlers. What I really liked about the book is that it jumps from time to time and from point of view to point of view. And you really do have to pay attention while you're reading this story. There are even moments where you're kind of taken out of the story altogether and placed into the future, and you're witnessing Bobby. I'll continue calling him Bobby because I can't pronounce his other name. As an old man telling his story to tourists. And this kind of happens like in the middle of the book. And he's entertaining them, you know, with boomerang tricks and dancing and jokes and kind of this character that he is. What I really also enjoyed was that each character kind of represents a response to the situation that they're in. That's on like a scale, and they're on varying parts on the scale. So for example, on the European side, you have Dr. Cross, who is very adamant that the Europeans have to work with the Noongars. They have to accept their way of life and integrate it with their own in order to make a good society. And it even comes to the point where he asks to be buried with his Noongar friend Winyaren. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have Governor Chain, who, you know, does kind of accept them, but sees them as uncivilized and that they need to either be, you know, put in their place as members of a European idealized society, or they need to die off or go somewhere else, you know, just not be involved with what his idea of civilization is. And then on the Noongar side, the Aboriginal side, you have Bobby, who is actually very willing to adopt the civilization of the Europeans. He can mimic their speech very well. He loves learning their dances and their songs. He actually helps with their economics. He helps on a whaling ship and all this stuff. And then you have Aboriginal characters like Manak, who know English but refuse to speak it. They're very angry at the settlers, and they go to such extremes as setting fields on fire to kind of take away the livelihood of the settlers. So we see we have these different spectrums going on, and there's like people in between, of course, as well. And we all know how the story, you know, ends up because it's historical fiction. We know that, you know, the Europeans eventually take over Australia, and that it's a very similar situation to, you know, what happened in, you know, the Americas and all that, where they, you know, the Aboriginals are now living in poverty, and they can't really continue their own way of life because the European way of life has taken over. I think this book is beautifully wrapped up when Bobby says, "We learned your words and songs and stories and never knew that you didn't want to hear ours." I think that's very poetically put and very well done. Overall, the book, I think, is beautiful. The characters really stayed with me, especially the character of Bobby Wobbling-Guinea, because you see where he ends up, and it's kind of sad. He does keep on the traditional role of oral storytelling and dancing and music, and but he's now, instead of sharing those stories, he's seen as entertainment for tourists. What I really think this book does really well is the style. I read a lot of reviews where they're just like, "I can't read this, it was horrible because he didn't do this and this and this," and I just want to say, like, grammar Nazis, I hate them. Hate grammar Nazis because they think they're correct in all these certain ways, but they're not. And some of the things that they believe in are so not true, or they're outdated, and they try to hold on to this way that they think is right and the way that they were taught, when in fact that a lot of teachers don't actually understand grammar very well. Grammar is a very fluid state. It is always changing. It's never the same. And if it weren't for books like That Deadman Dance, or if you think of another one, How I Live Now, it's another book where they, books like Ulysses and The Sound and the Fury, if it wasn't for those books that challenged those, ideas that we have of grammar, then it wouldn't change. So a big complaint that people had was about quotation marks and the lack of it in the story. And I really don't think you need quotation marks. It's a convenience to have when you're reading so you can go through it quickly, but it's not a necessity. I really find that skilled authors can establish a voice without any quotation marks, and they can make the multiple voices distinct, without having to say who is speaking. And an author that can do that doesn't need quotation marks and doesn't need to follow these rules of grammar that people think are actual rules, when in fact they're not. There are complaints about run-on sentences in the novel, and I'm thinking, like, this isn't a freaking essay, people. Like, it's a story, and the way the sentences are constructed reflect symbols, and they reflect the environment, and they reflect the speaker. And I found that there's parts in the Deadman Dance where the intention is to make you feel like you are on a boat, and you kind of have this kind of wavy effect going on in the language as well. Or they describe dances, and the way they describe them and the punctuation he uses may not be in the correct spot, God forbid, but it adds to that effect of feeling like you're actually witnessing this dance. It's a very kind of book that involves the reader, and it's very important to the imagery of the story and getting that point across. And a lot of people complained again about it not being linear in the timeline. I really object to that. Like, this is the way our memory works. Does not work from point A to point B. I mean, we're loopy. We go all over the place with our memory and with our stories and when we're thinking. And I think it's really interesting to have writing reflect that. And sometimes knowing the end of the story before the end of the story actually adds more to it. So you pay more attention to how things are doing and how they ended up that way, and as opposed to just, the ending. And yes. So we all know how the story ends in the Deadman Dance, and and in lots of cases of this European contact. And I think it's very important that Kim Scott reminds us as a reader that we're a part of this story, that our past actually helped construct this story, that you know, we are involved in it. It's, you know, you're taken out and you're pointed at. And it says you're a reader and you're a character in this story just as much as, you know, Bobby and Wynyaren and Dr. Cross and Christine and Jack Tar and all these different wonderful characters. Is you're part of it too, and I think that's what he does when he tells it so disjointedly. And when you realize that it probably is Bobby telling his story, he goes through the different threads. So, you know, he sees the whalers and he's reminded about the time he was on a boat, and that reminds him about dancing on the boat, which reminds him of dancing at the fire, which reminds him of stories that his people told, which, you know, and it, you know, that's how our minds work. And I think in all literature, it's really good to have the reader made responsible for making sense of the story just as much as the author is. And these types of style choices actually help involve the reader, actively engages you, instead of just letting you kind of like escape and not be involved and just kind of go with the flow. I really appreciated how Kim Scott was able to do this very successfully in his story, That Deadman Dance. So this is my favorite book of January. I definitely recommend it to anybody and everybody, whether you're Australian or not. And let me know down below in the book your thoughts on different topics that I brought up, and remember to keep on reading. Hey, you might want to check out Pickle's Instagram, Twitter, Goodreads, and other social media links in the description bar underneath.